Good morning.
Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen our women and men in uniform step up to the plate again and again. In seniors' homes, in northern communities, they're there for where we need them most. And because they respond to the call of duty without hesitation, whenever they're called upon, it can be easy to forget the toll this work can take. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces have always been there to do tough, dangerous jobs. So after a lifetime of service, far too many veterans live with chronic pain. Today, we are launching the Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence for Canadian veterans at McMaster University. This centre will focus on national research, training, and education to provide veterans with the support they deserve. No one, least of all those who have worn the maple leaf, should be without the care they need. Later today, I'll also be meeting with nurses here in Ottawa to thank them for their outstanding work. I know I speak for all Canadians when I say that we are incredibly grateful to the women and men who are keeping us safe right now.
Our men and women in uniform have always been there for us, and we have to be there for them as well. Today, we are launching the Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence for Canadian veterans at McMaster University. That centre will focus on research, training, and education right across the country to provide our veterans with the services that they need. To all those who have served Canada, thank you. The entire country is grateful to you, and we will be there to support you.
Over the last 2 months, a lot of Canadians have faced very challenging situations and very difficult choices. Just take workers in the fisheries industry. You can't harvest lobster from inside your house. So that leaves you trying to figure out how to either space people out on a fishing boat or cancel your operations. It's not an easy call to make. On top of that, prices and demand have gone down, putting financial pressure on fishers and their families. Taken together, this adds up to a really tough time. So I want you to know that we're listening, that your local MPs are making sure your concerns are heard, and above all, that help is on the way. Today, I can announce that we are investing almost $470 million to support fish harvesters. First of all, we are creating the Fish Harvesters Benefit. If you're expecting a 25% drop in income this season, you'll get support to cover 75% of your losses, up to about $10,000. And as a reminder, if you qualify for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy instead, remember that we'll be extending it beyond June. We're also introducing additional non-repayable grants of up to $10,000 for fish harvesters who own their own business and need support to bridge to better times. And for workers who are worried about next year, we will change employment insurance rules so that fish harvesters can apply for EI benefits based on the earnings of previous years. This all builds on the investments we've made for fish and seafood processors. And for farmers and aquaculture fisheries, we're also launching a $100 million Agriculture and Food Business Solutions Fund through Farm Credit Canada. This is yet another option to help agri-food companies facing unexpected financial strain. Whether you're a fisher, a food processor, or a farmer, we've got your back. And I know all Canadians do too. And to everyone who wants to show their support, buy Canadian. Pick up some Canadian cheese to help out a local dairy farmer. Have a fish fry or buy Canadian lobster. Not only will it taste great, but it'll help the people who keep putting food on our plates.
A number of industries are going through tough times right now, and the fisheries are no exception. Not only must people slow down or even stop all their activity to protect their workers, but prices and demand for these products has also declined. That's why we are introducing the Fish Harvesters Benefit. If you are a harvester who is expecting a 25% drop in your income this season, this measure will help you. It will cover up to 75% of your losses, up to about $10,000. And for people who are eligible to the emergency wage subsidy, we will be extending the program beyond June, as we announced last week. We will also be offering other non-repayable subsidies of a maximum value of $10,000 to fishers who are also owners of their own business and need help to come through these tough times. And for workers who are concerned about the coming year, we will be changing the employment insurance rules so that fishers can apply for EI based on their income from previous years. You are feeding our families. We are listening to what you need to get through this crisis, and we will be there for you. I would now like to talk about what we're doing to support the Indigenous peoples who have particular difficulties during this pandemic. We set aside $306 million to provide interest-free loans and non-repayable contributions to Indigenous businesses. With respect to First Nations, Inuit and Métis students, we are providing targeted support of more than $75 million, as well as helping young people find a job in their community this summer. And for women and children, Indigenous women and children who are fleeing violence, we have invested $10 million in emergency shelters. We have made significant progress, but we know that there is still more to be done.
Since day one, our government has been engaging with First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation leaders in the fight against this virus. In places like northern Saskatchewan that are dealing with COVID-19 outbreaks, it's become very clear that communities need this work to continue. That's why yesterday we announced support for the Meadow Lake Tribal Council and Métis Nation Saskatchewan for their pandemic response plan. Through this plan, we're partnering with communities to provide over $2.3 million for everything from food to supplies. We all want the same thing, to keep people safe, and we will continue coordinating to make sure that happens. I want to end today by recognizing that the May long weekend is coming up. It'll be different than normal because lots of places, including our national parks, are still closed. But this isn't forever. Canadians have been doing the right things these past many weeks, and that's why we can announce today some good news for the weeks ahead. As of the beginning of June, some national parks will be partially reopening so that people in the area can use trails and green spaces where physical distancing is possible. Getting fresh air is important, but we all have to be responsible about it. And we have to be prepared to make adjustments as needed. That's why, with the weather getting better, we're bringing in new regulations on boating as of June 1st to protect vulnerable communities in the north. No pleasure craft will be permitted to operate in Canada's Arctic coastal waters or in the coastal areas of northern Quebec and Labrador. Of course, this ban does not include boats used for essential fishing and hunting or for local community use.
National parks will remain closed over the weekend, but some will be reopening as early as June 1st. You will be able to take advantage of outdoor trails and green spaces while still practicing physical distancing. But we must remain cautious, and we have to be ready to adjust to new circumstances. So, starting on June 1st, pleasure craft will not be able to operate in the coastal waters of the Canadian Arctic or the coastal areas of northern Quebec and Labrador. That's what we have to do in order to protect each other. It's important to remember that this will not be forever. If everyone does their part, we will get through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phones for questions from the media. Just one question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Janice Dixon, The Globe and Mail. Line open.
Hi, Prime Minister. My question is about the Canada-U.S. border. A Canadian and an expectant mother living here says border guards have twice refused her partner, an American citizen and the father of her baby, from crossing into the U.S., and the border guards told him being here for the birth of his son was non-essential. Do you think someone in this circumstance should be able to cross?
We know Canadians are making extraordinary sacrifices through this difficult time. Loved ones who are saying goodbye to their parents and grandparents via FaceTime because they can't see them in person. People living through very difficult distancing that is causing a real impact on people. Obviously, we're trying to make sure that people can do the things that are most essential. But even as we were grieving over the past weeks in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, we needed to make sure we were respecting the rules in place to keep people safe. I can understand the difficulty and the challenge that closing the borders to all but non-essential travel is causing on many, many families. We need to make sure that the decisions are taken that are going to protect people. I understand that different decisions could be made on a case-by-case basis, but what we are doing now is what we need to do to keep Canadians safe for the coming months and years.
A follow-up, Janice?
Yes, the American man I mentioned was told by an officer that the only way he could see his son is if his expecting partner was hit by a car and they needed someone to take care of the baby. Is there not any room for compassion in these cases? He wants to try again after his son is born. Do you have any advice for this specific example?
Listen, we've seen families split up even internally in Canada because of COVID-19. It is difficult on everyone, and I can't comment on every case, obviously. But I do know that Canadians from coast to coast to coast are making tremendous sacrifices in order to protect their loved ones, their communities, their parents, their grandparents, and preventing our healthcare systems from getting overloaded.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Jenny Pashagumskum, APTN. Line open.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You mentioned something in French about Indigenous students and Indigenous women. I'm sorry I missed it. I was expecting a translation. Could you tell us what was said there?
We're making sure that students in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities get extra support. We're also investing in support for families, women and children fleeing domestic violence in Indigenous communities. We've made a large number of investments in supporting Indigenous communities across this country through this pandemic because we recognize the level of vulnerability, and I can tell you that Minister Miller will be at the noon update, as he is every week, to highlight the initiatives we're moving forward on with Indigenous communities.
A follow-up, Jamie?
Yes. My follow-up is concerning the rapid tests that were supposed to be coming out a couple of weeks ago. I know Indigenous communities have tests, but they're not the rapid tests. What happened to that?
As was highlighted a number last week, I believe, there have been challenges around the rapid test that I believe an Ottawa company had put forward. They've gone back to try and improve them or repair them. We've seen many new technologies come forward in terms of helping, and we've moved very quickly on them, but it also requires us to adjust when things aren't working exactly the way they were hoped to be working. So I know people are working very hard to make sure that Indigenous communities and indeed remote northern communities get the testing capacity they need as quickly as possible, but we need to make sure they are reliable tests.
Thank you. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I just want to come back to the wage subsidy that will be extended beyond June. and that there will be further details this week. Can you tell us now how long it will be extended? Well, we will have more to say about that tomorrow, I believe, but obviously businesses across the country want to have some certainty in order to be able to rehire their workers and know how they're going to be able to operate as the economy reopens. And the wage subsidy is a very important tool in terms of keeping the connection between employers and workers, and we want it to be as efficient and quick as possible. So yes, we will extend it, and we will have additional details to share with you very soon. Follow up? Yes, and what do you say to Canadians who are wondering what to do about their summer vacation? Should they stay in Canada? Some would like to travel between the provinces. And is the United States an option for them, or should it be forgotten about altogether for this summer? Well, I guess we all want to know what's going to be happening in the coming weeks and months. But the only thing we know now is that we have to do the right thing and continue to practice distancing, stay home as much as possible. That's the way we can protect ourselves and ensure that we can come out of this as quickly as possible. The decisions made by families with respect to this summer will depend to a great extent on the region or the province where they live and the rules that are in place starting in July. It's still a bit too early to predict what that will look like, but we know that this will not be a summer like others in the past. We're in a situation where families and individuals will have to make various decisions that will be different from what they expected 6 months before.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Louis-Samuel Perron, La Presse. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Now, as the pandemic is worsening in Montreal, we're seeing that some parks will be reopening there on June 1st. What will the criteria be for that reopening? Well, obviously, we're seeing that right across the country there are various situations, and we will be matching our federal actions with respect to federal parks with those in the provinces. Now, the decisions will be made about those parks in various regions, but, for example, in the far north, near Indigenous communities, there's very little chance that they will open on June 1st. However, there are others that will be more accessible and less problematic, and they can open. We'll have more to say about that in the coming weeks as to which parks will be reopening, but our goal is to align our decisions with those being made by local and regional authorities regarding provincial parks.
We know that this pandemic has hit very differently across the country, and therefore there will be different phases or different steps in reopening of national parks across the country. We will try and align with the local jurisdiction what the provincial parks nearby are going to be doing so that it is clearer for people in terms of what they can do in their own particular region. But for example, our Arctic parks won't be reopening anytime soon. Certain parks that are in close proximity to Indigenous communities will take a little longer to open because of vulnerabilities. We will have more to say in the coming week in terms of which parks will be opening up. But we know people are going to want to get outside. They're going to want to do that safely. So as of June 1st, we will be facilitating that to a certain extent, always staying careful and responsible in the way we do it.
Follow up? Yes, Mr. Trudeau, we have been seeing this morning in the National Post that when EDSC asks people to approve the applications for the benefit, they are not allowed to refuse them of people who may have voluntarily left their jobs. Well, I think Canadians recall the number numbers we saw last week. Millions of Canadians have lost their jobs in recent months. Now, as a government, we decided to help those people and to help them quickly. That's what had to be done. If we had introduced a system that was demanding a complete check on every person's application each time, there are millions of Canadians who would still be waiting to receive the emergency response benefit. We know that 99% of Canadians who are applying under these programs really need the money. And it's not because the 1% of fraudsters that we're going to slow down or prevent millions of other Canadians from receiving the help that they so dearly need. We have introduced measures to counter fraud, and we will be ensuring that that happens in the coming months. But the priority now is to help Canadians that need help, and that's exactly what we've been doing.
I think people remember well the job numbers that came out just last week that showed that millions of Canadians have lost their jobs. We made the choice as a government from the very beginning that we would help those millions of Canadians. And getting that help to 99% of the Canadians who needed it quickly and rapidly, if it meant even accepting that 1 or 2% might make fraudulent claims, was the choice that we gladly made. We needed to get help to Canadians immediately, and that's what we did. If we had asked the public service to perform background checks on everyone applying for the CERB, we'd still be waiting to get those checks out. And people needed that money. Now they needed that money last month when we delivered it. So saying, we have put in strong measures to ensure that anyone who is trying to defraud the system will get caught and there will be consequences. But that was not our priority. Our priority was helping people immediately, and the fraud measures will kick in the coming months.
Kevin Gallagher with CTV News. Could you expand on what those measures or mechanisms are? And also, you said yesterday the CRA would be responsible for a lot of that with the CERB. They're also responsible for the wage subsidy. So is the CRA going to need more resources to tackle the potential fraud that has come from these vital federal programs during this pandemic?
Well over 7 million Canadians have applied for the CERB. Millions of Canadians are receiving the CERB. Millions of Canadians have lost their jobs. We needed to help them rapidly and efficiently. That means to get the CERB, people simply needed to fill out an attestation to make commitments that they were in a situation that they deserved to get the CERB. Of course, there's going to be a few people who will misrepresent themselves and try and defraud the situation. Defraud the situation. But we know that the priority was getting help to people who needed it. And that's exactly what we did, including by increasing the capacity of the federal government to deliver these checks and support CRA and other government workers. The choice we made was to get the money out to people immediately when they needed it, so we could do the social distanciation, so we could stay home in the way we needed to, and make sure that the fraudsters get caught as we move forward.
It didn't really answer if there was going to be more resources for the CRA to do this. I'm also wondering, as provinces start to reopen their economies, non-essential businesses start to open up, there are likely to be workers that are concerned about returning to work for their own safety. Either they're immunosuppressed, they have difficulty finding adequate childcare options, or perhaps they're unsatisfied with their workplace safety protocols because of the coronavirus. Will those workers have an option to remain on the CERB, for example, or other federal programs? What will happen to workers that have concerns over their safety but now might have to go back to work?
On the first part of your question, the measures we've put in have required the public service across this country to step up in extraordinary ways. And we're making sure that they get the support they need as they deliver in a rapid way, in a reliable way, the support that millions upon millions of Canadians are needing, and we need to thank them for the work they're doing. And of course, we will always make sure that they have the resources necessary to do the things that Canadians need them to do, and do them as incredibly well as they have been. As the economy begins to reopen, as people start looking at going back to work, there are going to be lots of questions about safety, about childcare, about next steps. And we're going to work very closely with the provinces, with industries, with employers, with people to give as much clarity as we possibly can. We're in an unprecedented situation. We're figuring this out step by step as we move forward, as we get into the next phases of this. But every step of the way, our focus is going to be on keeping people safe, first and foremost. That needs to be the priority that all Canadians put at the top of the list.
En français, s'il vous plaît, sur la sécurité des travailleurs.
On worker safety, please. In the coming weeks, there will be many questions asked as to how we can reopen the economy, how people can return to work, what's going to happen with daycare centers, and what is going to be done about individual issues. And we will be working very hard together to find answers to those questions. This is an unprecedented situation, and there are no easy answers. We will be collaborating, as we have been, with the provinces. We will be listening to Canadians' concerns and find the best way to ensure everyone's safety, while at the same time looking at a gradual reopening and recovery of the economy. Radio-Canada, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. We're seeing that the wage subsidy is not being used very much by the employers. The CERB seems to be harming that program. Do you think it's time to get rid of the CERB earlier than was expected? Well, the fact is that there are many people out there who have lost their jobs and have no access to the wage subsidy. So the CERB has a very important role to play. But as we said, by extending the federal wage subsidy, we are hoping that more and more employees will be rehired by their employer, so that we can focus on the recovery that is to come. We want to ensure that there is a direct connection between employees and employers, and we want to find the right ways to ensure that the recovery is quick and efficient. Now, could you not model it a little bit like employment insurance and allow people to get part of the CERB? Would that not be a better way to encourage people to actually work? Well, that is something we're looking at right now. It's all about determining how we can reopen the economy and how we can go from a situation where people are at home protecting themselves to one where they're going out, going back to work. And we need to figure out how we can modify certain programs, maybe extending other ones. So these are all questions we're looking at right now. But for now, we're still in an emergency, and we're still supporting people so that they can stay home and so that we can control the spread of the virus. And as we get closer to the next steps, we will in fact be changing those programs. But how? That remains to be seen. For now, we're saying that we're extending the wage subsidy because that will be key to keeping people at work.
Of our global news, I just want to pick up on talking earlier about workers and safety. More than 40 inspectors with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency are getting sick going to work in meat packing plants. I'm just wondering what the federal government is doing to protect these inspectors.
Yeah, no, we know the situation is extremely difficult in many meat packing plants across the country. That has been a real challenge, and we always are trying to find that balance between assuring a safe and reliable food supply for Canadians, which is fundamental and necessary, while at the same time ensuring the protection of the workers who are there. That obviously includes the food inspectors, and we need to make sure that they have access to the right kinds of personal equipment, protection equipment, and the right conditions to keep them safe. As important as it is to keep our economy going and get food on the table, we also need to make sure we are prioritizing worker safety.
The union, just to follow up on that, the union representing these meat inspectors, they say that they've been giving a work or else order from the agency, and if they refuse to go to work, they will be disciplined. So I'm just wondering why they're being ordered to go to work if they don't feel safe.
I think getting that balance right is extremely important. We need to ensure that essential services like the food supply continue to flow to Canadians, but we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep workers safe, and we will continue to work with Labour, with industry, with provincial partners to make sure that both of those things are being done. Okay.
We know that we must continue to protect the food supply chain and ensure the safety of Canadians. That's critical, but it's also critical to ensure the safety of all workers. So we will continue to work with the unions and with the employers and the provinces to do everything we can right across the country so that everyone is working in safe conditions.
Hello, Prime Minister. Tom Perry, CBC. The WHO's emergencies chief, Dr. Michael Ryan, he was quoted today saying that this virus may never go away, that it could become just another endemic virus in our community. So I want to know, as a government, how do you plan for that kind of scenario? And you're loosening up some restrictions on national parks today. What do you say to Canadians who might hear this and think, well, things are never going to get back to normal?
I think we know that there are things that we took for granted last year and years before that have changed. We have seen this world change rapidly over the years. You used to be able to get on a plane without taking off your shoes first. I mean, we have seen measures brought in that have made shifts in our society, some for the better, some for the worse. COVID-19 will be one of those things that creates changes in our society. Our responsibility as a society, as governments, is to try and figure out how to minimize the negative impacts of those changes while maximizing the safety of Canadians. There will be adjustments, but reopening national parks, for example, on June 1st, means that we know that you can't prevent Canadians from going outside when the weather is nice. You just have to help them do it safely. Continue to impress upon them the need for physical distancing, recognize that certain areas are more vulnerable than others and will need to remain closed, but create opportunities for Canadians' well-being, for their mental health, while at the same time protecting their physical health. Getting that balance right is something we're doing in the short term, but obviously there'll be plenty of reflections over the coming months and indeed years about how we make sure that Canadians and people around the world are kept safe from this pandemic or from potential next pandemics. Okay. We
have to recognize that things will change in our world, even after the end of this pandemic and even after we have a vaccine. We will have learned lessons that will lead to changes in our behavior and changes in the way that we operate as a society and as a planet. At the same time, our responsibility as a society and a government is to minimize any disruption while maximizing protection and safety for all citizens. So it's a delicate balance that we will be seeking. Now, with respect to national parks, for example, we will be able to reopen some of them on June 1st, but we will also be encouraging people to continue to practice physical distancing. But we know that going outside, getting some air, and outdoor activities are important to people's health. And we want to ensure that we can allow them to do that more safely so that people will not be vulnerable. There's no doubt that we will be reflecting on how we have to behave in the coming weeks and years, whether we have a vaccine or not. But for the time being, we're making the best possible decisions so that we can all have a better quality of life and all be safe.
And you've announced support for First Nations in their fight against COVID-19 today. I'd like to ask you about something that happened on Sunday in Saskatchewan. A First Nation there says that the RCMP interrupted an important ceremony over concerns about physical distancing. Premier Scott Moe says There can be no exceptions to the province's rules about public gatherings. What do you say?
I think Indigenous community leadership knows that we need to be keeping people safe, and we should be able to work with them to develop ways of continuing with important customs and practices for them in a way that abides by health recommendations. I think that's something for the leadership of the community to take on, and we, of course, will be happy to work with them. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Okay, that is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Thursday, giving us an update on his government's response to the pandemic.
We now join the following program in progress.